The Crawford mansion looked more like a palace than a home, white pillars rising high, windows tall enough to touch the sky, and marble steps that gleamed like frozen water. Sarah took a deep breath before stepping out of the bus, her old sneakers squeaking slightly as she tightened her grip on the mop bucket. She felt painfully out of place in her faded uniform, but she had no choice. A single mom with bills piling up didn't get to be picky. Just 1 week, she whispered to herself. 1 week, and I'll catch up on rent. But the moment she stepped through the grand double doors, she knew this job was unlike any other. The air smelled of roses and wealth. Polished chandeliers hung above her, and portraits of cold-eyed ancestors lined the walls. A young butler eyed her skeptically. "You're the new janitor?" he asked, doubt dripping from every word. "They don't last long here." Sarah forced a polite smile. "I've cleaned hospitals, schools, even airports. I can handle a house." He chuckled humorlessly. "It's not the house you need to handle, it's them." Before she could ask who them was, a sharp crash echoed through the hallway. Glass shattered. Then came laughter. High-pitched, mocking, and entirely unbothered. The butler winced. "The twins," he muttered. "Good luck." Sarah followed the sound, her steps cautious. At the end of the hallway stood two identical girls, maybe 12 years old, dressed in matching silk dresses that shimmered like ivory. One held a toy drone, the other an open bottle of soda, which she promptly poured onto the marble floor. "Oops," Lily said sweetly. "Didn't see you there. Guess you'll have to clean it up," Lila added, smirking. Sarah paused, heart pounding. 10 other staff members had apparently quit over these two. She could see why. The arrogance, the mischief, the deliberate challenge in their eyes. But instead of reacting, Sarah crouched and began mopping without a word. The twins watched, waiting for her to snap, to scold them, to quit like all the others. But she didn't. When she finally stood, she gave them a calm, steady look. "Everyone makes messes," she said softly. "Even me. What matters is if we clean them up." For a moment, neither girl spoke. Something flickered in their expressions: surprise, confusion, maybe curiosity. As Sarah walked away, the twins exchanged a look neither understood yet. For the first time, someone hadn't given up on them. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the Crawford mansion, catching on the dust motes that danced lazily in the air. Sarah was on her knees scrubbing the marble floor, humming softly to herself, when she heard the faint sound of arguing from the garden. She hesitated for a moment before stepping outside. There, amid a sea of roses, stood the twins, Lily with her arms crossed, Lila near tears. Between them lay a mess of flower stems and broken shears. "They won't look right," Lily snapped. "You're cutting them wrong, Lila. Mom used to make perfect bouquets, and now they're ugly." Sarah's heart clenched. She hadn't known much about the late Mrs. Crawford, but she'd seen the dusty photo in the hall. A beautiful woman with kind eyes, holding the twins when they were babies. The pain in their voices made something ache deep inside her. "Maybe it's not about making them perfect," Sarah said gently, walking toward them. "Maybe it's about making them yours." Both girls turned sharply. No one had spoken to them that way before, softly, but without fear. Lila sniffled. "But they don't look like hers," she said quietly. "That's okay," Sarah replied. "Your mom made hers with love. You can do the same." She knelt beside them and picked up a broken stem. "Look, this one's bent," she said, placing it in a small jar. "But it's still beautiful if you give it a little care." Lila watched, wide-eyed. Lily frowned, torn between irritation and curiosity. "That's not how she used to do it," she muttered. Sarah smiled. "That's the point, sweetheart. You're not her, you're you." Something in her tone softened the air around them. Within minutes, the twins were sitting beside her, sorting flowers, laughing at the crooked petals and mismatched colors. They painted old jars into bright rainbow vases using leftover art supplies. For the first time in a long while, the garden rang with laughter instead of bickering. From the balcony above, Ethan Crawford watched silently, his hands gripping the railing. His daughters hadn't smiled like that since their mother's death. When Sarah finally stood to leave, her hands covered in paint, she found Ethan waiting near the garden door. "You've done something no one's been able to do," he said, his voice low, almost reverent. Sarah shrugged lightly, brushing hair from her face. Children don't need perfection, she said softly. They just need to be seen. Ethan looked at her for a long moment, realizing that this quiet janitor had done the impossible. She'd brought warmth back into his cold, silent home. By the end of the week, something had changed in the Crawford mansion. The echoing silence that once filled the halls had been replaced by laughter, tentative at first, but growing bolder each day. Sarah could feel it, even in the air she breathed. The twins had stopped hiding behind their sharp words and started following her around, pretending it was just to make sure she cleaned properly. That afternoon, Sarah was polishing the staircase railing when she heard a small voice behind her. "Can we help?" It was Lily, holding a dust cloth awkwardly, Lila peeking shyly from behind her shoulder. Sarah smiled. "Sure, but be careful with the polish. A little goes a long way." 10 minutes later, the two girls were giggling uncontrollably as they smeared more polish on themselves than on the wood. Sarah couldn't help but laugh with them. "You two are officially the worst janitors I've ever trained." Lila grinned. "You mean the best." Their laughter carried through the grand hall, reaching Ethan Crawford's study door. He looked up from his work, frowning slightly. It had been so long since he'd heard that sound in his house, it startled him. He followed it quietly, stopping at the edge of the staircase where Sarah knelt with his daughters, polishing the railing together. For a moment, he just watched. His twins, his once unruly, grieving, unreachable daughters, were smiling again. And it wasn't forced. It wasn't an act. Sarah noticed him then, straightening quickly, embarrassed. "Mr. Crawford, I'm sorry, we were just..." He raised a hand, stopping her. "Don't apologize," he said softly. "It's nice." Lily rolled her eyes. "Dad, you should try cleaning. It's actually fun." He chuckled under his breath, something warm flickering in his usually guarded expression. "Maybe next time." As he turned to leave, Sarah caught the faintest smile tugging at his lips, a sight she suspected few people ever saw. Later that evening, as she gathered her cleaning supplies, Lila tugged on her sleeve. "Miss Sarah." "Yes, sweetheart, will you still be here tomorrow?" The question hit deeper than she expected. Sarah looked at their hopeful faces, the same faces that once glared with defiance, and her heart softened. "As long as I'm needed," she said. And for the first time since taking the job, she realized it wasn't just about the paycheck anymore. Somewhere between broken vases and painted jars, she had started to care, for two lonely girls and the man who didn't know how to reach them. The storm came suddenly that evening, sweeping across the Crawford estate with heavy rain and distant thunder. The twins had been restless all day, sensing their father's tension. Ethan had an important business deal on the verge of collapse, and the house seemed to carry his unease like static in the air. Sarah had just finished mopping the foyer when she noticed the twins sitting by the window, their faces pale as lightning flickered outside. Without a word, she grabbed a blanket and joined them on the floor. "It's just thunder," she said gently, wrapping the blanket around them. "Loud, but harmless." Lily leaned closer. "Mom used to sing when it rained," she whispered. Sarah hesitated, her throat tightening. Then she began to hum, a soft lullaby her own mother used to sing. The twins relaxed almost instantly, their heads resting on her shoulders as the thunder rolled in the distance. That's when Ethan walked in. He stopped mid-step, the sight before him making him forget the phone still pressed to his ear. His daughters, his wild, grieving twins, were curled up peacefully beside the janitor, safe and calm. For a long time, he simply watched. When Sarah looked up, their eyes met across the room. She expected disapproval or awkwardness, but all she saw was quiet gratitude. He ended his call and walked toward them. "You've worked enough for today," he said softly. "Come sit by the fire. All of you." It was the first time he'd invited her to stay. The four of them gathered in the library, flames crackling in the fireplace. The twins, sleepy from the storm, soon nodded off, their heads resting in Sarah's lap. Ethan sat across from her, his sleeves rolled up, exhaustion softening his usually sharp features. "They trust you," he said after a long pause. "They've never trusted anyone like this since." He trailed off, the name he couldn't say hanging in the air. Sarah looked down at the sleeping girls and smiled faintly. "They just needed someone to listen," she said. "Someone to stay, even when they made it hard." Ethan studied her, the quiet strength in her voice, the compassion in her eyes. "You've done the impossible," he murmured. "You've brought them back." She shook her head gently. "No, Mr. Crawford, they just needed permission to heal." For the first time, he smiled fully, a real smile that reached his eyes. The storm outside began to fade, but the warmth inside that room only grew stronger. And as Sarah sat beneath the flickering firelight, with two sleeping girls beside her and their father watching silently across the room, she realized that somehow, in the least expected place, she had found a family again.